Chester, this big old pig, had been digging in the same spot for 3 whole days. Not just poking around like pigs usually do, but really going at it, like he knew something super important was hidden there. Tobias Marsh, his owner, didn't know yet that his favorite pig had sniffed out something that was supposed to stay buried forever. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the ranch as Tobias strolled to the pig pen, holding his coffee mug. He'd built this farm with his own hands 20 years ago, back when his wife, Ruth, was still around to dream with him. Now it was just him and his animals, and Chester was driving him nuts. That huge Yorkshire pig had dug a hole 3 feet deep in the corner of his pen. Every time Tobias filled it up, Chester went right back and started digging again. The pig's nose was all scratched up from scraping against rocks and roots. Tobias leaned on the fence, watching Chester dig with a focus that was almost spooky. The pig was breathing hard, snorting as he shoved dirt away with his snout and kicked loose soil with his hooves. Sometimes Chester would stop, like he was, listening for something deep underground. Other farmers had told Tobias pigs were clever, but this was more than smart. It was like Chester was obsessed. He barely ate his food anymore, spending all day at that hole. Dolly, the smaller pig in the pen, gave up trying to get Chester's attention and just stayed in the opposite corner, looking nervous. Tobias tried everything to stop him. He moved Chester's food to the other side of the pen to distract him. He even built a barrier around the hole. But Chester just pushed through it and kept digging. The weird thing was how exact Chester was. Most pigs sniff around all over the place, but Chester always went back to the same exact spot, like something was calling him from below. Tobias finished his coffee and shook his head. He'd been raising pigs for 23 years and never saw anything like this. Ruth used to say animals could feel things people couldn't, like earthquakes or storms or even death coming. But what could Chester be sensing 6 feet under the ground? As Tobias turned to head back to the house, he heard something that stopped him in his tracks. Chester quit digging and made a low, sad sound, not a normal pig grunt or squeal, but almost like he was crying. Tobias looked back at the hole. In all his years on the ranch, he'd never heard an animal make a noise like that. Chester was staring right at him, like he was trying to say something super important. Something was down there, and Chester wasn't going to stop until he found it. That afternoon, Tobias stood by the hole with a shovel in his hands. He tried to think Chester was just being a weird pig, but that sad cry stuck with him. 23 years of working with animals taught him to trust his gut when something felt wrong. The hole was deeper than he thought. Chester had dug a perfect circle about 4 feet wide, with steep sides that showed he wasn't digging randomly. The bottom was hard from Chester stomping on it, but the edges had scratches that looked almost on purpose. Tobias climbed into the pen, and Chester backed off, but kept watching closely. Tobias knelt by the hole and touched the walls. The dirt felt different here, softer than the hard clay all over his land, like someone had messed with it before. Tobias stuck his shovel into the bottom of the hole. It went in easier than it should have, like the ground wasn't packed tight. He dug carefully, scooping out one shovelful at a time while Chester paced behind him. Snorting like he was happy, Tobias was helping. 3 feet down, the shovel hit something that wasn't dirt or rock, something soft that pushed back a little. Tobias's heart started racing as he brushed away the dirt. He saw a piece of faded blue fabric, like part of an old shirt or jacket. He kept digging and found more of it, still in one piece, because the clay soil had kept it from rotting away. Chester went totally quiet, standing super still, watching Tobias work. The other animals on the ranch seemed to feel something too. The chickens stopped clucking, and even the horses far off in the pasture gathered by the fence, all looking toward the pig pen. Tobias gently pulled up the fabric. Under it, his fingers touched something smooth and curved. He cleared more dirt and saw a human rib cage. His hands started shaking as he realized what it was. Chester hadn't been digging for no reason. The pig had found human bones buried under his pen. But who was this person? And how long had they been there? Tobias sat back, his mind spinning. His family had owned this ranch for 3 generations. His grandpa built the first house. His dad made it bigger. Tobias got it all fair and square. There was no family graveyard, no records of anyone buried here, but someone was definitely down there. From the look of the fabric and bones, they'd been there a long time. Chester grunted softly and stepped closer to the hole, like he was telling Tobias to keep going. The pig's eyes had a creepy kind of smarts that made Tobias nervous. It was like Chester knew exactly who was buried there, and somehow Tobias felt like he should know too. Tobias climbed out of the pen and walked to his house, his legs wobbly. His hands were still shaking as he poured himself a big glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table. Finding human bones in Chester's hole changed everything, but he didn't know how or why. He pulled out old photo albums Ruth had kept, looking for any hint about his family's history on the land. His grandpa, Jonas Marsh, started the ranch in 1891. His dad, Samuel, worked it until he died 10 years ago. 3 generations, and nobody ever mentioned a body buried on the property. But as Tobias flipped through old photos, one picture froze him. It was from 1923, showing his grandpa standing by the original farmhouse with a few other guys. One of them looked familiar, but Tobias couldn't figure out why. The guy was tall and skinny, wearing a blue shirt like the one Tobias just found in the hole. On the back of the photo, someone had written names in pencil: Jonas, Samuel, Marcus. Webb, Theodore Pike, Marcus Webb. Tobias had never heard of Marcus Webb, but the name felt important. He stared at the man's face again, noticing his sharp cheekbones and deep eyes. There was something intense about him that made Tobias uneasy, even across 100 years. He went back to the pen as the sun started setting. Chester was lying by the hole, his big head right near the edge, like he was guarding it. When he saw Tobias, the pig stood up and moved aside, like he was waiting for him. Tobias started digging again, this time more serious. The bones were definitely human, a whole skeleton lying on its side, like someone placed it there on purpose. This wasn't a proper burial. This was someone hidden. As he dug more, Tobias found other stuff with the bones. A leather belt with a fancy silver buckle, old boots and something that made his blood freeze, a small metal star, old but clearly, a sheriff's badge. It said, Sheriff Marcus Webb, and was dated 1923, the same year as the photo. The same guy who stood with Tobias's grandpa and dad, wearing the same blue shirt now wrapped around his bones. Tobias looked at Chester, who was staring back with those weirdly smart eyes. Somehow, this pig had found a sheriff from 1923 buried on his family's land. But sheriffs don't just vanish and get buried in secret. They get murdered. And if Marcus Webb was killed and buried here, someone in Tobias's family knew about it. Someone hid him and kept it quiet for over 100 years. Chester made that sad sound again, and this time Tobias got it. The pig wasn't digging for fun. He'd found a murder someone tried hard to hide. But as Tobias held the sheriff's badge in his shaking hand, he realized the scariest part wasn't what Chester found. It was what it meant about his own family's past. Tobias stayed up all night, digging through every paper his family left behind. Birth certificates, land deeds, tax records. Anything that might explain why Sheriff Marcus Webb was buried on their land. The more he looked, the more questions he had. County records in an old trunk said Marcus Webb went missing in September 1923. The official story was he disappeared while checking out cattle thefts in the area. His body was never found, and the case went cold. But Tobias knew exactly where Webb ended up. What creeped him out most were the dates. Webb vanished on September 15th, 1923. His grandpa's journal, which Tobias had never read before, said that same day. Jonas Marsh suddenly got a big pile of money, enough to buy more land and double the ranch's size. The journal didn't say much, but Jonas wrote, "The Webb matter is settled. We can move forward now." 3 days later, he bought the Morrison land. "Our troubles are behind us," he wrote. Tobias felt sick as it all clicked. His grandpa didn't just know about Webb's disappearance. He was part of it, and that crime made the family rich enough to grow their ranch. As the sun came up, Tobias went back to the pen. Chester was waiting, standing by the grave like a loyal guard. But something was different. Chester wasn't looking at the hole anymore. He kept staring at the old barn from his grandpa's time. Tobias followed the pig's gaze and searched the barn, checking spots he'd never bothered with before. In the loft, behind piles of rotting hay, he found a hidden metal box. Inside were papers that made his hands shake. Sheriff Webb wasn't just looking into cattle theft. He was investigating his own deputy, Theodore Pike, the other guy in the photo, for taking bribes from cattle thieves. Webb's notes said Pike was working with local ranchers, including Jonas Marsh, to hide the thefts. The worst was a letter Webb wrote but never sent, meant for the territorial marshal. It listed evidence against Pike and Jonas Marsh, saying he planned to arrest them. On September 15th, 1923, the letter was dated. September 14th, Webb came to arrest Tobias's grandpa and ended up buried in what became Chester's pen. Jonas Marsh and Theodore Pike killed a sheriff to protect their crimes, then used the money to buy more land and act legit. Tobias looked at Chester, still guarding the grave. The pig had sensed a wrong buried in the dirt and worked hard to show it. A 100-year-old secret was out because of a pig who wouldn't let the dead stay hidden. But Tobias had a tough choice. He could tell the police and reveal his grandpa's crimes, ruining his family's good name. Or he could bury the truth again and let Chester's work be for nothing. Chester watched him from across the yard, like he was waiting to see what kind of person Tobias would be. Would he respect the law Webb died for? Or protect the family name built on that lawman's murder? Chester made that sad sound again, like a cry for justice that waited 100 years. Tobias sat on his porch for hours, staring at the papers that could wreck everything his family built. The weight of a 100-year-old murder felt heavy, like it was pushing him down. Every board under his feet, every fence post, every improvement his dad and grandpa made, it was all paid for with dirty money. Chester had wandered over and lay at the porch steps, his big head on his hooves, staring at Tobias like he knew how big this choice was. The easy thing would be to burn the evidence and bury Webb's bones somewhere far away. Nobody else knew what Chester found. The sheriff's case was cold for 100 years. No one was looking now. Tobias could save his family's name and keep the ranch that was his whole life. But every time he looked at Chester, he heard that sad cry. Webb died trying to do right, and his killer got rich. For 100 years, the sheriff's body lay in unmarked ground while Jonas Marsh was celebrated as a great rancher. Tobias thought of Ruth, who always believed in doing right, no matter what. She'd tell him to do the right thing, even if it hurt. But she wasn't here to face the fallout. She wouldn't see their life's work fall apart for sins from before. They were born. As the sun got high, Tobias walked back to the pen. Chester stood up and joined him at the grave's edge. They looked down at Marcus Webb's bones, the sheriff who tried to stop criminals and paid with his life. If you were Tobias, what would you do? Protect your family's name and bury the truth to save all you've worked for, or tell the world about a 100-year-old murder and risk losing your reputation and ranch? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you'd pick. Because what Tobias did next would either hide this wrong forever or finally give Marcus Webb the justice he died for. Tobias knelt by the grave and picked up Webb's badge, feeling how heavy it was in his hand. The metal was cold, but it felt like it carried the sheriff's strength. This wasn't just a piece of metal. It stood for everything Webb believed in. Chester grunted softly and nudged Tobias's shoulder, like he was trying to comfort him but also saying what needed to be done. Tobias looked around his ranch, the land that kept his family going for 3 generations, the home where he planned to live forever, all built on murder and lies. How could he keep living off a crime that ruined a good man's life? But as he stood up, badge in hand, Tobias saw something else in the grave he'd missed. Tucked under Webb's ribs was a small leather pouch. From what he could tell, it held more than just random stuff. Whatever was in there might show secrets bigger than his grandpa's part in the sheriff's death. If you're liking this story, subscribe to the channel. Chester was staring at the pouch too, and his look changed from sad to serious. The pig knew there was more to find, and Tobias had a feeling that what came next would make everything else seem easy. With shaky hands, Tobias pulled the leather pouch from under Webb's bones. The pouch was in good shape, thanks to the clay soil, and when he opened it, he gasped. Inside weren't just small things. There were photos, papers, and a detailed map of the whole county. The photos made Tobias's stomach churn. Cattle with changed brands, men loading stolen animals onto trains, and worst of all, clear pictures of Theodore Pike and Jonas Marsh running the show. Webb wasn't just looking into small-time cattle theft. He'd found a huge crime ring that covered 3 counties. The map made it all clear. Red X's marked spots across the area with dates and numbers next to them. Tobias knew some of those places as ranches owned by his grandpa's business partners, guys who got rich around the same time Jonas did. At the bottom of the pouch was a list of names that made Tobias's blood run cold. These weren't just local ranchers. They included the territorial governor, 2 federal marshals, and the railroad boss. Webb had learned the cattle theft was protected by big shots in the government. Chester moved closer, like he felt how huge this was. This wasn't just about his grandpa's crimes anymore. Webb died because he found corruption that went all the way to the territorial capital. His murder didn't just silence one honest sheriff. It let a whole crime network keep going for years. Among the papers was Webb's final report, written neatly for the U.S. Marshal Service in Denver. It explained how stolen cattle were moved through corrupt officials, sold to government buyers, and the money split between ranchers and politicians. The operation was worth tons of money in 1923. But what scared Tobias most was realizing the corruption didn't stop with Webb's death. The names on the list included families still powerful in the county today, descendants who were now mayors, judges, and business leaders. The crime ring Webb died to expose had just changed and kept going. As he looked closer at the map, Tobias's heart raced. Some of the marked spots were places where other ranchers had found human bones over the years, but local officials called them old Indian graves or forgotten burials and brushed them off. Webb wasn't the only one killed to protect this secret. The map showed at least 6 other spots where bodies might be buried, all marked between 1923 and 1925. The crime ring got rid of anyone who got in their way, and the evidence was spread across the territory. Chester made that serious sound again and walked toward the barn. Tobias followed, and the pig led him to a part of the floor that looked newer than the rest. Chester pawed at the boards, just like he did at the grave. Tobias pried them up and found another hiding spot with a metal box. Inside was a pile of money more than Tobias had ever seen. But it was old money from the 1920s. It was proof of the payoffs that kept the crime ring going. A note in his grandpa's handwriting was attached. Payment for services rendered. The Webb problem is permanent. T. Pike sends his regards. It was dated September 16th, 1923, one day after Webb vanished. Tobias now saw the whole picture Chester had uncovered. His grandpa didn't just help steal cattle and kill a sheriff. He got paid big to cover it up. The ranch's growth came from dirty money from a crime ring that killed multiple people. And out there, the descendants of other criminals were still living off wealth built on murder and lies, thinking the truth was buried forever. Tobias spent the next morning copying every photo, paper, and piece of evidence Webb had collected. He took pictures of the badge, the money, and the map with its red X's marking burial sites. If he was going to tell the world, he needed to make sure the evidence couldn't be destroyed. Chester followed him everywhere, like he knew something big was happening. The pig was back to normal, except he wouldn't leave Tobias's side, like he sensed trouble coming. That afternoon, Tobias drove to the County Historical Society to check the names on Webb's list and see how many of those families still had power. What he found made his choice clear. Martha Kellerman, the old historian, was happy to help when Tobias said he was researching his family. But when he showed her copies of some names from Webb's papers, her face changed. "Where'd you get these names together?" she whispered. "Old family stuff," Tobias said carefully. "Why?" Martha looked around nervously and leaned in. My grandpa used to talk about a big corruption scandal in the 1920s, she said. Sheriff Webb was close to exposing something huge when he vanished. Anyone who tried to dig deeper had accidents or left town fast. She pulled out a thick folder from a locked cabinet. I've been looking into this for years, but I never had enough proof. The families you're asking about? Their descendants still run this county. The mayor, police chief, 2 commissioners, even the district attorney. Tobias felt Webb's badge in his pocket. The crime ring hadn't just lasted. It had turned into a powerful group controlling the county's police and government. Telling the truth wouldn't just reveal old crimes. It would shake up the power structure that ruled for 100 years. There's more, Martha whispered. 3 people tried to research this in the last 20 years. One had a car crash. One got threats and left. One just vanished. If you're going to chase this, be careful who you trust. Driving home, Tobias noticed a black truck following him. When he turned onto his ranch road, it passed by, but he saw the driver, a man in a police uniform. Someone was already watching him. That night, as he sat on his porch, looking over the evidence, Tobias heard trucks pull up. 3 vehicles stopped in his yard, and men got out, local businessmen and officials he knew. Leading them was police. Chief Raymond Pike, great-grandson of Theodore Pike, the crook deputy who helped kill Webb. Evening, Tobias, Chief Pike called, his hand on his gun. Heard you've been asking about old family history. Can we talk? Chester came from behind the house, standing between Tobias and the men. The pig looked ready to fight, growling low with his hackles up. Even against armed men, Chester was ready to protect Tobias. We know what you found, Pike said, stepping closer. And we know you made copies. That was a mistake, Tobias. A big one. Tobias stood up slowly, feeling Webb's badge in his pocket and thinking of the sheriff who died trying to stop these families 100 years ago. History was happening again, but this time there was a witness who couldn't be quieted. Tobias had already mailed copies of everything to newspapers and police outside the county's control. Too late, Tobias said. The truth's already out there. Pike's face darkened as he realized he was in the same spot his great-grandfather was in 1923. But unlike Webb, Tobias was ready, and Chester wasn't going to let another good man disappear. The standoff didn't last long before sirens filled the air. Federal agents and state police swarmed the ranch, surrounding Pike and his men before they could do anything. Tobias had spent the morning not just copying evidence, but calling every police agency outside the county. Pike's face went pale as he saw he was trapped. You don't know what you've done, he growled. Do you know how many families you'll ruin? I know exactly what I did, Tobias said, holding up Webb's badge. I gave Marcus Webb the justice he died for. The federal agents moved fast, arresting Pike and his men while securing Tobias's evidence. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, who led the team, looked at Webb's papers in amazement. This is the best evidence of old corruption we've ever seen, she told Tobias. Your pig didn't just find a murder victim. He uncovered what might be the longest-running crime ring in territorial history. Chester watched it all, looking almost happy. As the corrupt officials were taken away in handcuffs, the pig went back to his pen and lay down calmly for the first time in weeks. His job was done. The investigation made big news across the country. Webb's evidence led to finding 6 more burial sites across 3 counties, just like his map showed. DNA tests identified some victims as other police, journalists, and honest officials who threatened the crime ring over the years. The mayor, district attorney, and 12 other officials were arrested as the investigation grew. The crime network Webb died to expose finally fell apart because of evidence a pig wouldn't let stay buried. Martha Kellerman, the historian, helped explain how the crime ring lasted through generations. They thought they were safe because they hid the truth, she said in court. But truth finds a way to come out when you least expect it. The trials went on for 2 years and led to lots of convictions. Property taken from the crime ring was worth millions, built up over 100 years of corruption. Much of it went back to victims' families or to police training programs. Tobias had a hard choice about his ranch, which grew with dirty money. After thinking a lot, he gave the extra land his grandpa bought with Webb's murder money to create the Marcus Webb Memorial Park, with a proper grave for the sheriff and monuments for all the victims. Chester became a bit of a star, featured in newspapers and TV as the pig who solved a 100-year-old murder. People came from all over to meet the animal who wouldn't let a wrong stay hidden. Chester seemed to like the attention, but he never dug again. If you're liking this story, subscribe to the channel. Tobias kept a smaller part of the original ranch and kept farming, but his life was totally different. He started helping with old unsolved cases and worked with police to solve other historical crimes. The experience taught him that sometimes you have to listen when someone, even a pig, is trying to tell you something big. Years later, when people asked how he found the courage to reveal his family's crimes, Tobias always gave credit to Chester. "He showed me some truths are too important to stay buried," he'd say, "and justice doesn't have an end date." Chester lived to be 14 and died peacefully in his sleep. When they buried him, Tobias put a small copy of Webb's badge next to him. It felt right that the pig who brought justice to a murdered sheriff should have a badge of honor in whatever comes next. The Marcus Webb case became an example for investigating old corruption, and Chester's story led to dozens of old cases being reopened across the country. Sometimes justice takes 100 years, but it comes anyway, especially with a stubborn pig who won't stop digging for the truth. Now, click the video on the screen for an even better story with a twist so wild you won't forget it anytime soon. Click the video